before you go anywhere, listen. This isn't just another story about pain. It's a confession. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy to hear, but it's real. Every word, every memory, every scream I buried for years, it's all here. So if you think you can handle the truth, stay until the end. Because by the time you hear what he did and what my own mother hid, you'll understand why I can never be the same almost again. Tender. I remember the kind of his voice more than the words forget to breathe. You're special, Lily, he used to whisper. The first time he said it, I was 8. The last time, I was 15. And I finally understood what those words really meant. It was raining that night, the kind of rain that doesn't wash anything clean. It only makes the dirt cling tighter. The house smelled was asleep in the next room. Whiskey. The TV flickering with static because the antenna was broken again. I remember the static more vividly than her presence. She always seemed to fade into the background when he was round, like a ghost pretending to be alive. He sat on the edge of my bed, fingers tracing the blanket, his breath heavy with alcohol. I used to think he was lonely. I used to believe that his kindness when he said I was special, that if I finally saw the truth it would shatter. His smile. It wasn't love, it was ownership. Years later, I'd read that abusers often choose words that sound like gifts, like praise. But at 8, I didn't have the vocabulary for evil. I only had the desperate need to be seen, to be loved. My father had left before I could form a memory of him, and my mother, so when my she was always tired, special, always promising to do better. He started small when the bills stopped piling gifts, extra attention. I remember he bought me a red notebook once, said it was for my stories. You've got imagination, he'd say, grinning. Don't waste it on silly things like school. And I didn't understand why he said that, not until he started keeping me home more often. You're sick. By the time I was 12, she needs rest. I barely went outside, and she'd nod. My friends too exhausted to argue. The teachers stopped asking questions. I became invisible to everyone except him. And in that invisibility, he built his world, a world where his words were truth, where his hands were law, and where special meant mine. There were moments when I tried to tell my mother. Once, I whispered it while she washed my hands shaking for a second as I tried to form the water running over her hand. He scares me. Then she turned, I said, smiled, and said, he's just strict, honey. He wants what's best for. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything, but when I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, I stayed silent. I thought I was protecting her. The nights grew longer after that. I started counting the seconds between the creaks of the hallway floorboards. When they didn't stop outside, I'd pretend to be asleep. Sometimes they holding did. My breath. Sometimes until my they chest didn't. Burned. The first time he touched me, I remember the clock ticking. The sound was louder than his voice, louder than my heartbeat, louder than everything. I never told anyone. Not then, not for years. Because how do you explain that your prison was built with words like love, family, special? How do you confess that you confused kindness with control, that you let yourself believe that what was happening was your fault. I grew up fast after that, not in the way people mean when they say a child is mature for their age. I grew up by erasing myself. I learned to smile when he smiled. They don't die to quietly. Stay quiet when they he was angry. Everything I around became them. The perfect and by daughter. The time I turned the perfect 15, secret. But the walls of that house had absorbed every scream I never let out. I used to stare at the cracks in the paint and imagine them splitting open, swallowing him whole. The last time he called me special, I didn't respond. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the coward he was. Something inside me shifted that night. That's when I started planning. It was the beginning escape. Of courage. I didn't maybe know just then. Madness, but that night would change everything. The lies, the manipulation, even my mother's silence. Everything would unravel, and when it did, I would finally see the price of surviving someone who calls you special. The years that followed blurred into each other, like ink bleeding across paper. Every season felt the same, stale air, muffled voices. Used to count time, the faint smell of cigarette smoke peeled that never left the curtains. Of 16. It had curled so much it looked like the walls were trying to escape too. My mother pretended not to notice how quiet I'd become. She'd move around the house like someone performing a role she hated. She smiled for him, cooked for him, and, when he wasn't looking, flinched at the sound of his footsteps. We were both prisoners. He had rules, but she convinced herself I couldn't that wear makeup was a home. Couldn't mine was boys. Silence. Couldn't hers was denial without his permission. Every conversation began and ended with him. I'm protecting you, he'd say. You don't understand how dangerous the world is. Sometimes he'd make me repeat it. I'm special. You protect me, over and over, until the words lost meaning and became routine. My mother like brushing my teeth or folding laundry. He controlled the money to keep the lights on. Every Friday, she'd hand him her envelope of cash, and he'd tuck it into a metal box under the bed. I used to imagine that box holding our freedom, that if I could somehow take it, we could run. But every time I hinted at leaving, he'd remind her of how much she owed him. Who do you think pays for this house? Huh? No, he'd Richard. Shout. She'd whisper, think you'd survive out there without me. She always included me in that. Eyes on the like floor. I agreed. Like I belonged to the same fear. By the time I turned 17, I had learned the art of invisibility. I knew exactly when to laugh, when to apologize, when to disappear into my room and pretend to be asleep. I stopped writing in the red notebook he'd given me. Every page felt like a betrayal of the girl keeping notes in my head. How long his moods lasted, how much he drank before he got cruel, which nights were safe to dream, and which weren't. There was one evening in particular, late summer, 2011. The air was thick, the kind of heat that made your skin feel sticky. My mother and I were setting the table when he came home early from work. He was drunk. His shirt was half slammed the door, shouting about something I couldn't make out. Bills, neighbors, maybe both. My mother froze. I stood still, holding a plate in my hand. Then he turned to me. You think you're better than me, don't you?" he said. His eyes were red, unfocused. "You and that attitude." I didn't answer. I didn't move. The plate slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp, already like a gunshot. My mother screamed my name, hiding behind the walls I'd built. After that night, he didn't speak to me for days. Silence became its own kind of punishment, cold, suffocating, endless. When he finally broke it, it wasn't with words. It was with a letter. He slid it under my door one morning before work. It was short. "I'm disappointed in you. You're not the girl I raised." He made me believe. I stared that his approval was until my eyes and without blurred. It wasn't anger I felt. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't hit you like a storm. It seeps into your bones like humidity. You start to mistake survival for love. You start to think obedience is safety. In those years, I learned how to smile in front of others, how to laugh just enough to convince neighbors that everything was fine. No one noticed the tension in my mother's at the grocery store, or the way my smile stopped short of my eyes. What a lovely family. But things changed the day I got a scholarship letter in the mail. I had applied in secret, a writing program in Chicago. I wanted out, wanted to breathe air that wasn't recycled by his lies. I hid the letter in a book under my bed, but he found it. I'll never forget that night. He stormed into my room. His voice holding was calm, the envelope, which made like it worse. Evidence. You think you're leaving? Run away, he said. From me. I earned it, I said, trembling. It's my chance. He laughed, a slow, cruel laugh that made my stomach turn. Your chance. You wouldn't last a week without me. Who's gonna protect you, huh? Who's gonna love you the way I do? And that's when I realized love shouldn't sound like a threat. That night, I packed a bag. Slipped out while they were asleep. Where I'd go, heart pounding, how I'd so survive. I thought, but I knew I the whole neighborhood. The air outside felt strange, heavy, but alive. For the first time, I could breathe. I didn't make it far that night, but running was the first real decision I ever made for myself. Freedom wasn't what I imagined. It didn't taste like air. It tasted like fear. The first night after I ran, I slept in the back smelled of gasoline parked behind a gas station. I wrapped my jacket around my knee and tried not to think about him, about the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, about the word special echoing in my skull. In the morning, I called my mother from a borrowed phone. She answered on the second ring, her voice trembling, half sob, half relief. "Lily? Oh my God, where are you?" "He's been worried sick." I worried sick. You don't the phrase understand. Made me want she to laugh and scream. You're making things worse. I can't go back. Just Mom, come home, I said. We'll talk about it. He promised he won't get angry. I hung up before I could say anything else, because I knew what he promised meant. I'd lived enough years inside his promises to know they were just traps dressed up as forgiveness. But running away wasn't a victory. It was a countdown. I had no money, after no plan, 2 days of sleeping and no behind that gas station. I caved and called a friend from school, Emma. She lived with her grandmother a few towns away. When she came to pick me up, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me tight, warm, and silent. That hug nearly broke me. Emma's grandmother let me stay in their attic. She was kind but cautious, the kind of woman who believed in keeping her hands busy. She said and her words stay measured for a little while, as long as I helped around the house. It was more kindness than I'd seen in years, but kindness also terrified me. I didn't know how to accept it without waiting for the cost. 2 weeks passed before the call came. My mother again. This time, her voice was different, flat, rehearsed. He says he'll let you go, she said. He just wants to see you one last time. Mom, to say goodbye. I whispered. Please tell me you don't believe that. My pulse hammered in my ears. He's trying, Lily. He said if you don't come, he'll... She stopped herself, then exhaled sharply. Double quotes, please. Just talk to him once. After that, you can leave. That was the impossible request. The kind that sounds small, but costs everything. One last meeting. One last chance to be manipulated. But the truth was, I didn't answer right away. I missed home. I wanted to scream even if her, home was around. To ask how she could still protect him. Her soft humming when she did laundry. The tiny moments of peace that somehow existed between the storm. So I agreed. Emma begged me not to go. You owe him nothing, she said. He'll twist it, Lily. You know he will. But I went anyway. Because trauma makes you chase closure even when you know it doesn't at the diner near the old highway. The same one where we used to get pancakes on Sundays. He wore his nicest shirt, the blue one my mother bought him for his birthday years ago. He looked older, softer, like time had started to eat away at him. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. He smiled when he saw me. There's my girl, he said. I froze. That phrase, he tilted his head, felt pretending like to be around my throat. You don't have to be like that. I just wanted to talk. We sat across from each other in a booth. The waitress came and went. I didn't touch my coffee. He did most of the talking about my mother, about how hard things had been since I left, about how misunderstood he felt. Then he leaned closer, his tone softening. You know, he said, you may hate me for ever wanted to but protect one day you'll see the world out there. My hands were trembling. I kept under the table. I wanted to throw the coffee in his face, to make him feel something close to what he made me feel. Instead, I said, you didn't protect me. You broke me. His eyes darkened. For a second, the mask slipped. There it was, the real him, the one behind the word special. Then he smiled again, calm as when ever. I stood to You're leave. Being dramatic, he reached out said, and grabbed my always wrist. Were. The pressure was familiar, not enough to bruise, just enough to remind me he could. Don't make me regret letting you go, he said softly. You don't know what your mother's capable of when she's scared. That sentence haunted me for years. What your mother's capable of. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And when I got back to Emma's house that night, I found out had reported me as a runaway with emotional problems. They said I'd been unstable, that I was a danger to myself. I tried to explain, but my voice broke, and the words came out wrong. They took me back home, back to the house, back to him. That night, he stood in the hallway, watching me unpack. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His silence said everything. You see, my mother whispered that first standing night behind him. I just lay there, fine now, staring at but the ceiling. It wasn't fine. Counting it would never be fine between again. His footsteps in the hallway. Every creak of the floor made my body flinch. I had forgotten how to exist in that house, how to breathe without asking permission. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of cigarettes, and something metallic, like rust and regret. He didn't touch me that night. His power was in the silence, in the way he could make the world feel small again. The room, the bed, even my thoughts shrank under the weight of him. My mother knocked once before dawn, left a tray of food outside my door like I was a sick child. She didn't come in. She didn't ask if I was okay. For days, I stayed in that room. He went to work. She went through the motions, cleaning, cooking. Sometimes like a woman staring at me, the world her eyes red, mouth trembling like she wanted to say something, but couldn't. I thought it was guilt. Later, I learned it was fear. The lie started to unravel by accident. It was a Wednesday, mid-July. I was helping her in the kitchen, peeling potatoes in silence, when the power went out. She told me to fetch a flashlight from the basement. I hadn't been down there in years, not since I was a child, when I used to play among the boxes and broken furniture. Before he told me the basement is off limits, the air downstairs was cold, damp, the kind that clings to your lungs. I found the flashlight on a shelf, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A loose floorboard near the old water heater. Curiosity wasn't something I'd allowed myself. I knelt in a long and pried it open, but that day beneath it felt like there was a metal tin box ignore, covered in dust. Inside were old photos, yellowed at the edges, and a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. I shouldn't have opened them, but I did. The first letter was addressed to my mother. The handwriting wasn't his. I know you don't want me to contact her, but she deserves to know. She's my daughter, Anna. You can't erase me forever. The one I read the name again, had told me died in a car father's name when I was 2. The letters told a different story, that he'd been alive for you, that he'd tried to reach out, that my mother and stepfather had kept everything hidden. My real father had been sending money, small amounts, but enough to help. Only I never saw a dime of it. They had taken it, every check, every message, and turned it into silence. When I went upstairs, the flashlight trembling in my hand, I felt like I was walking through someone else's life. My mother was at the sink, humming again. I placed the letters on the table. She froze the moment she saw them. "Where did you find those?" she whispered. "In the basement," I said. "Why didn't you tell me he was alive?" She looked at me for a long time, her face pale, her eyes distant, as if she'd been waiting years for this confrontation. "Because he wasn't supposed to be part of our life anymore." "Our life?" I repeat. "You mean his life," I said, jerking my head toward the hallway. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't understand, Lily. He made me choose." He said if I didn't cut contact, he'd leave, and we'd have nothing. No house, no money, nothing. I did what I had to do to keep us safe. You think I didn't know what he was? You think I didn't see? But he promised he'd change. Gripping the counter. Every time her shoulders shook. Every time he hurt you, he promised. And I believed him, because believing was easier than leaving. Her voice broke. For a second, I saw her not as my mother, but as another victim. Someone who had drowned so long ago she'd forgotten what air tasted like. But that didn't make it easier to place the letters on the table in front when of him. He came home and said, I confronted him about everything. He looked at them, then at me, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose, and smiled, that cold, patient smile that always came before the cruelty. So you found them, he said. Your mother was supposed to burn those. She didn't. I think snapped. He wanted you. Kept me he from sent my a father. Few checks you and took disappeared. Everything from I me. Gave you a home. He shrugged. I gave you a name. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word hit me like a slap. Something inside me cracked then. Something that had been bending for years. I picked up the box and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and burst open, scattering the letters like a storm of ghosts. He stood, slow and deliberate. You're just like her. I thought he was going to hit me, but instead, come crawling he smiled back like she did. But I didn't crawl. I walked out. I didn't even grab my things. I just left Dot again. This time, I didn't look back. I went to the police the next morning. I told them everything. The abuse, the manipulation, the forged letters, the years of control. They listened, took notes, nodded. Then one of them said, but do you have what proof, that meant? Proof? As if a child's silence wasn't proof enough. Justice doesn't move fast for girls like me. So I found my father. The letters had an address. Old, faded, but it was a place to start. And that journey, that search for the truth, would lead me somewhere I never expected, to the final betrayal. And the twist that shattered everything I thought I knew about. It took me 3 buses, a night in a bus station, and every ounce of courage I had left to reach the address written in one of the letters. A small town outside of Springfield, Illinois. Quiet, ordinary, the kind of place where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and wave to their neighbors without fear. The sky was low and gray when I arrived, and the wind smelled like rain and cut grass. The house was smaller than I imagined, white paint peeling from the siding, a rusted mailbox leaning to one side. I stood there for 10 minutes before knocking, my hands trembling so hard I could barely lift them. A man answered. He looked older than in the photos I'd seen, his hair gone silver, his eyes lined with exhaustion. But when he saw me, those eyes widened in a way that made my heart twist. God, he didn't need me to say my name. Her. He knew. For a moment, Lily, neither of us moved, barely then above a whisper. Forward, reaching out slowly, as if afraid I might vanish. I let him hug me. It felt strange, foreign, but not wrong. His arms were warm, trembling. He smelled like coffee and sawdust. We sat at his kitchen table. He made tea, though his hands shook so badly he spilled half the water. I watched him. He looked down, trying to piece together. I know, Father, your mother. Fragments. She told you that. I thought you were dead. Why? I said finally. Why did she do that? Why did you let her? He took a long breath. Because she was scared, and I didn't fight hard enough. He told me everything then, about how he and my mother had married young, too young. How he'd worked long hours trying to provide, while she grew restless, lone. Then she met him, Richard. He was my charming back then. The man who would later call me kind special. Of man who knows exactly what to say to make people trust him. I didn't see what he was until it was too late. Richard convinced my mother that my father was unstable, that he had gambling debts, that he was dangerous. Lies, all of it. He forged documents, staged phone calls. He even called the police once, pretending to be my father. The court granted Richard guardianship over me after their marriage. I tried to fight. My mother believed him, his voice breaking. I sent letters. I called. I even came to the house once. But she wouldn't let me see you. Said I was sick. Said I needed help. Then one day she sent a message saying you were dead. A car accident. There was a fake obituary. I believed her. I stared at him, my mind spinning. The silence that both of us was unbearable. He nodded slowly. The sound of the rain outside of him, and I was too late. That kept me from screaming. Finally, I asked, why didn't you try again? You knew where we were. He looked at me with eyes full of regret. Because I thought you'd moved on. I thought maybe you were happy. I didn't want to make things worse. Happy. The word tasted bitter. For the first time, I saw the entire pattern. My father, not just me, his manipulation. He built a world, but the web of truth was a threat and silence was survival. I stayed the night. My father gave me the spare bedroom. It was clean but empty. The walls bare except for one framed picture on the dresser. A photo of me as a toddler, holding a stuffed rabbit. I hadn't seen that toy in years. He'd kept it all this time. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the phone ringing. I couldn't make out the words. My father answered in the hallway. But when he hung up, his voice was pale. Was that her? I asked. He nodded. She's in the hospital. Panic attack, they said. She's asking for you. I froze. You told her I was here. She called last night, he said softly. I thought she deserved to know you were safe. Anger flared in my chest. Safe? She gave me to him. Dad. She chose him. He looked at me helplessly. She's still your mother. For something the words cut deep. I didn't want to go, so we drove back. The hospital was small, the kind that smells like disinfectant and cheap coffee. When I walked into her room, she looked so fragile, it almost didn't feel real. Her skin was pale, her hair thinner than I remembered. She smiled weakly when she saw me. You found him, she whispered. I nodded. Because I did thought you lie if you knew the truth, tears filled her you'd eyes. Hate me. And I couldn't lose you, too. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her for every night she turned away, every time she chose his comfort over my safety. But all I saw was a woman broken long before I was. He told me, I said, everything. About the letters, about the fake obituary. She closed her eyes. He said it was the only way. He said your father would ruin us. And she reached for my hand. I believed him. I didn't God help me. Not I believed him. Then she said something that changed everything. Lily, there's something else you don't know. Her breath hitched. The money your father sent, it wasn't for me. It was for you. For your treatment. I frowned. What treatment? Her lips trembled. He said you were sick. That you needed medication. That if we didn't keep you quiet, the doctors would take you away. He said I felt the air leave my lungs. Unstable. Sick. Broken. Medication. The pills he made me take. The nights I woke up dizzy and numb, it all clicked. He hadn't been protecting me. He'd been drugging me, controlling me. My mother's voice faded as the truth crashed down around me. I wasn't sick. I was silenced. And when I looked at her, the woman who'd stood by and let it happen, I finally understood the price of my father. I walked out of that hospital room, but the past wasn't done with me, because 2 days later, I got a call from the police. Richard was dead, and somehow everyone thought I had something to do with it. When the call came, I was staying at a cheap motel off Route 54, the kind of place that smelled like bleach and despair. I'd been there 2 nights, too restless to sleep, too drained to think. This the police detective Raines on the phone with the county said my name's department. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding the death of your stepfather, Richard Hay. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. What did you say? He repeated it, steady, emotionless. He was found in his home early this morning. Your mother made the call. I sank onto the bed, the cheap mattress creaking beneath me. My mind went blank. The detective Richard was dead, though they asked me to come to the station. But I drove there in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every mile between me and that house felt like a lifetime. When I arrived, the building smelled of old coffee and disinfectant. The detective was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He motioned for me to sit. I understand you've had difficulties with Mr. Almost laughing. Hayes in the past. That's one way to put it. He opened a folder, flipping through pages. Your mother stated that you'd recently had contact with him. A meeting at a diner 2 weeks ago. Yes, I said. He asked to see me. I didn't want to go. And why did you? I hesitated. Closure, I guess. It was a mistake. Don't look away now. You've heard the lies. The moment you've seen the manipulation, what really happened but what to him comes next, and what my mother did to keep it buried. My entire world collapsed. So if you've come this far, don't stop. Stay with me until the end, because the truth doesn't just hurt, it shatters. He nodded, jotting something down. Your mother also mentioned an argument that night. I stared at him. We didn't argue. He tried to manipulate me. Like, do always. You know anyone I left who might have wanted to harm his gaze him? Sharp. I laughed softly, bitterly. You mean besides half the people who ever met him? He didn't smile. Then he said, your fingerprints were found on the back door handle and the hallway railing. I blinked. What? He turned the folder toward me. There were photos, grainy, black and white, showing the back entrance of the house I'd once called home. Your mother said you returned 2 nights ago. No, he studied me for a long moment, my voice rising. According to her statement, you came by after midnight. You said you wanted to talk to him. She claims you were upset, angry. My blood ran cold. That's not true. She's lying. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You can understand why this looks bad, Miss Carter. You had motive, history. You disappeared after the incident. He didn't respond right away. I disappeared because he destroyed my life, he said. I said, the coroner found traces of sedatives in his system. Same kind prescribed to you a few years ago. The room tilted. My stomach dropped. The pills, the ones he made me take when I was too emotional. The ones that kept me quiet. You think I did this? I whispered. I think we need to know why your medication was in his bloodstream. He said evenly. I wanted to tell him everything about the lies, the forged letters, the years of manipulation. But trauma has a way of stealing your words when you need them most. I just sat there, shaking, until he sighed and slid a card across the table. We'll be in touch. When I left the station, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that didn't match how I felt inside. I sat in my car for hours. But why? To the world herself? My mother had lied. Or something worse. That night, I drove back to the house. The crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, pale yellow under the street lights. No police, no reporters, just silence. The front door was locked, but I knew the side window still stuck halfway open. It always had. I slipped inside. The house looked frozen in time. A mug of coffee in the hallway on the table. I noticed his jacket hung over the chair. A broken glass. Felt wrong. A smear of something dark against the wall. Blood, maybe. I followed the trail to the living room. That's where I saw it. The metal box. The same one I'd found in the basement weeks earlier. It was open. The letters gone. But inside was something new, a small cassette tape, a label written in his handwriting, for Lily. My hand shook as I picked it up, but I found one in his office. The old kind with dusty buttons and a cracked speaker. I pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment, then his voice filled the room. If you're listening to this, then you finally decided to face the truth. You think I ruined you. You think I'm the monster. But the real monster isn't me, Lily. It's the one who made me do it. My heart stopped. Your mother wasn't a victim. Every lie she knew. She was the one who planned it. I just followed orders. The tape clicked off. I sat there in the dark, the words echoing in my head. She knew. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know who to believe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car outside the house until dawn, gripping that cassette tape like it was a live wire. The sunrise was a faint blur through the windshield. I replayed his voice in my mind, and cold, over and over, the kind of morning until I started to doubt everything, my own memory. Unreal. Could he have been telling the truth? Could my mother really have known? By 7 a.m., I drove to her house. The front yard looked the same as always, roses blooming along the fence, a cracked porch swing swaying slightly in the breeze. I rang the bell once. No answer. Again. Nothing. Finally, I pushed the door open. She was in the kitchen. It wasn't locked. Sitting at the table with a cup of tea, calm as if nothing in the world had changed. When she saw me, her face didn't even flinch. "Lily," she said softly, "I was wondering when you'd come." There was something chilling in her composure. I placed the tape on the table between us. "You lied to the police," I said. "You said I came here the night he died." She looked at the tape, then back at me. "I haven't been because here you did since before the hospital." I didn't. Her eyes narrowed, my voice not trembling. In confusion, but in calculation. "You really don't remember, do you?" My stomach turned. "What are you talking about?" She took a sip of tea, slow and deliberate. "You came that night, Lily. You were angry. He said something to you. I don't remember what, but you stormed out. You said you'd had enough, that it was over." She tilted her head. Hours later, smiling faintly, I found him on the floor. Or maybe you just can't face what you're lying. Something snapped in me. "Don't twist this," I shouted. "I know the truth." I heard the tape. Her hand froze midair, the cup rattling against the saucer. "What tape?" "The one he left. The one where he said you planned everything. The pills, the manipulation, all of it." Her expression flickered. Then, just for a moment, as if nothing had happened, and in that sliver she smiled of silence, again. "You really believe that truth. Man?" It was there, everything he behind did to her you. Eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore," I whispered. She stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the garden. "You were such a difficult child," she said, almost wistful. "So emotional, so fragile. You needed guidance. You needed control. Richard gave you that. He broke made me disappear," I said. For the first time, eyes hard her now. Mask slipped. "He made you strong." Her mouth tightened. "No," I said, and her hands tears burning. "You think I didn't suffer too? Do you have any idea what it's like raising a daughter who blames you for everything? Who ruins every chance you get at happiness?" "Happiness," I repeated. "He abused me, and you let it happen." Her voice rose, sharp, trembling with years of repressed anger. "You don't understand. Told him to make you behave. He wasn't supposed to touch you. He was supposed to fix you. Too late." My whole body went cold. "You told him." She covered her mouth, realizing what she'd said. "Lily, listen to me." But I was already backing away. "You knew. You knew what he was doing, and you let it happen." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't look like guilt. They looked like fear. "You don't know everything," she said. "Protect softly. Us." He was going to leave my me. Voice breaking. "He said you told people things." She stepped closer, I had to protect pleading. Us. "I did what I had to do. He was going to destroy this family." "There was no family," I said. "Just lies." She reached out, grabbing my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Lily, please. You can't tell them. You can't let them find that tape." I pulled free. "I already did." Her face drained of color. For a second. "What?" She just stood there, to Detective Raines, hollow, I came defeated. Then her hands fell to her side, almost to herself. "You shouldn't have done that." "What are you talking about?" Her eyes met mine, calm, eerily calm. You think this ends with him? It doesn't. There are people who made sure this stayed buried. Richard wasn't the only one who knew how to keep secrets. The room suddenly felt smaller, darker. My chest smiled that strange, "What did you do?" empty smile. But she didn't answer. The same one she'd given me after every broken promise of my childhood, and walked away. I stood there frozen, surrounded by the echo of her words. It doesn't end with him. And in that moment, I realized the nightmare I thought I'd escaped wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The next few days blurred into one long sleepless stretch of paranoia. Every sound outside my motel window felt like a threat. A car door slamming, footsteps in the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights. The words my mother had whispered, "It doesn't end with him," kept looping in my head until they became almost a rhythm. I couldn't eat, couldn't breathe. I just kept seeing her face, calm, cold, and utterly certain of something I didn't yet understand. Then his phone rang. Was different. Miss this Carter, time. Detective Rains, more careful. "We've listened to the tape you gave us. You did the right thing turning it in." I waited for him to continue. "There's more to this than we thought," he said finally. "I can't go into details over the phone, but there's something you need to see. Can you come by the station?" When I arrived, the evidence room smelled like dust and burnt paper. Rains was there. Inside holding was the cassette, a plastic evidence the one bag Richard had left. Only now, a section of the tape was melted. "What happened?" I asked. "Someone broke in last night," he said. "They went straight for this file cabinet. Nothing else was touched." My skin prickled. "You think my mother? We don't know," he interrupted. "But this goes deeper than domestic abuse. Richard had a connection with a local psychiatrist. Ever heard of it?" I shook my head. He ran something called the Restoration and Project, slid a stack of papers toward me. It was a private behavioral study in the late 90s, funded by a foundation out of state. Experimental therapy for emotionally unstable adolescents. Your name is on the list, Lily, along with 5 others. My pulse quickened. "What kind of therapy?" he sighed. "That's what we're trying to figure out." Most of the records were destroyed. Grainy copies of old forms, half the text redacted. My mother's signature was on one of them. She'd signed a consent form when I was 9 years old. Under treatment authorization, it read, "Approved for behavioral modification through controlled pharmacological exposure and environmental conditions." I dropped the paper. "That's not therapy," I said. "That's torture." Rains nodded your guardian. "It seems Richard was one of their the air-left environment participants." My childhood suddenly rearranged itself in my mind. Every pill, every test, every session in the basement under the pretense of discipline. It all made sense now. I wasn't just a victim of his cruelty. I was part of an experiment. "Why would she agree to this?" I whispered. "My mother, she couldn't have known what it was." Rains hesitated. I felt like the ground was tilting. She received payments from the foundation. He looked monthly at the sheet. "We found 22,000 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that's close to 40 now." I staggered back. "She sold me," He didn't correct me. I left the station shaking, gripping those photocopies until the ink smudged onto my palms. Outside, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. Every drop felt like static against my skin. Back at the motel, I tore through every memory I had, every letter, every photo, every note from my mother. I found one from 1998, written in her handwriting. Remember, Lily, if you take your medicine and do what he says, the bad thoughts will stop. You'll be a good girl again. I wanted to scream. Instead, I packed a bag and drove. I didn't know where. I just knew I couldn't stay still. I found myself outside an old, shuttered clinic on the edge of town. Brim Psychiatric Center. The sign was cracked, the windows boarded, but the locks on the back door were new. I used a rock to break one. Inside, the air smelled of mold and paper. The walls were lined with metal filing cabinet, half empty. I moved through the dark hallways with my phone's flashlight trembling in my hand. RO3. Then, in a storage room, RO7. I found them, and one boxes marked with patient code. I froze. Inside was a thin folder and a series of videotapes. The labels read, Session 2, Observation, 2001, Session 5, Behavioral Response. I slid one into the dusty player on the counter. The screen flickered to life. A little girl sat in a chair, pale, shaking, eyes glassy from medication. Her eyes flickered toward a man off screen behind the camera. Questions in then a calm, she whispered, clinical Mom voice, says it's do my fault. Do you feel safe with the Richard? Tape ended. The girl hesitated, shaking. Sometimes my reflection ghosted on the blank monitor. I had proof now, proof of what they did. But before I could think, I heard a sound. Footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate. I turned off the light. My heart hammered through the crack in the door. Then, in a low voice, he said, wearing Lily, a coat, you shouldn't have come back here. He paused outside the room. It wasn't my mother. It was him, Richard Hayes, alive. For a second, my body forgot how to move. My mind couldn't reconcile the sight in front of me, the voice, the silhouette, the impossible familiarity of it. He was supposed to be dead. I'd seen the photos. I'd read the report. But there he was, standing in the dark hallway, his face half lit by the beam of his flashlight. Eyes gleaming like wet glass. Hello, Lily. The way he said my name, calm, almost tender, sent ice up my spine. I stepped backward, my hand brushing the edge of the metal table. You're dead, I whispered. You're supposed to be dead, he smiled. That's what they wanted you to think. The words barely made sense. They needed a conclusion, they found your body. A neat ending. He took a slow step the forward. Tape. A body. After all, yes, things were getting complicated. My voice trembled. You faked your death. He tilted his head, not me there. The ones who paid for all of this. You don't really think I had the power to disappear on my own, do you? The Foundation. I breathed. He smiled wider. Good girl. You always were my fingers closed around the edge of a videotape. Good slick girl. With dust. Hit why something primal here? Inside I asked. My stomach to finish turned. What we started, he said. They sent me to collect the files. You weren't supposed to be here, Lily. I'm not yours to collect, he sighed, almost sadly. You still think you're free. You think you're some tragic heroine who broke her chains. But you're still one of us. They never signed you out of the program. He reached into his shook coat my head and pulled out a small folder, newer than the rest, clean and crisp. He tossed it onto the table. Inside, my name was printed across the top. Subject R01, active status, monitored. You've been under observation since the day you left that house, he said. Every therapist you saw, every prescription you filled, every breakdown you had, they were watching. It's what they guiding. I was just the instrument. You're trying to control me again. I asked. It's what you paused. Your mother made her choice. She believed in the project. She thought we could fix you. Fix me, I hissed. I was a child. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. A child who broke things. A child who didn't obey. A child who needed order. That old, familiar rage flared. The one I'd buried deep. It hit him across the jaw. Silence. And he stumbled back with a grunt. I swung the videotape at his face. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. My breath echoed off the concrete. Behind me, his voice called out, "Come again," almost amused. You can't run from what's in your blood, Lily. I didn't look back. I burst through a side door and into the rain, my shoes slipping in the mud. I reached the car, fumbling by the time I started my hands shaking so badly flared behind me. Twice. His car. He was following. The roads were slick, empty. My pulse matched the rhythm of the wiper as I sped toward the highway, the motel, the police, the files. I didn't know where to go. All I knew was that I had to survive this. Then my phone buzzed, and no number. Against all reason, I answered. Lily, a woman's voice said. Where is he? Come, he found even. You. My mother's voice, she said quietly. The wheel tighter. I warned you not to look. What the hell is going on? I shouted. You said he was dead. He was, she said, for a while. Then they needed him again. You're working with them, I said. I'm keeping you alive, she snapped. You think the police can protect you? You think the world wants to know the truth? No one does. That's why I signed the papers by destroying place. There because was they promised to then help she you. Said softly, help me. My you voice were never broke. Supposed to remember. I swerved, nearly hitting a guardrail. Remember what? Her tone changed, fragile now, almost human. The trial phase. What they did to the others. You weren't supposed to survive it. The line went dead. For a long time, I just drove. I didn't feel my hands, or my heartbeat, or the somewhere cold behind streaming down my face. The headlights disappeared. Maybe he'd turned off. Maybe he'd given up. Or maybe he was waiting. When I finally pulled over, I realized I'd reached the cliffs, the same place he used to take me as a child to watch the ocean and think about obedience. I parked and stepped out, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I walked to the edge, looking down at the black water below. I thought my about reflection shimmered about in the waves, ending it, fractured right there. Where it all began, unrecognizable. But then, in the distance, I saw it, A faint light in the storm, blinking through the darkness. Not headlights. A lighthouse. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the first real feeling of choice I'd ever had. I turned away from the edge, clutching the file to my chest, and whispered to myself, "No more
I
running."
followed the light
this time
until the
I
rain
finished
thinned,
it, and
the
with
road
that,
narrowed
I
into
headed
gravel.
toward the light.
The old lighthouse sat at the edge of the cliff like a scar against the sea, its windows shattered, its door hanging loose, waves roaring below like something ancient and hungry. I remembered coming here as a child, holding his hand, counting the seconds between flashes. Back then, it was beautiful. Now, it looked like the last
stairs
safe
creaked
place
beneath
left
my
in the
weight
world.
as I climbed.
Inside, one hand
The air
clutching
smelled
the
of
file,
salt and
the
rust.
other gripping the cold metal rail. My pulse matched the crash of the waves outside. Each step echoed with ghosts. At the top, I found her. My mother stood near the lamp, her gray hair pulled back, her coat soaked from the storm. She didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe she'd known all along that I'd come. "I told you not to look," she said
always
softly.
stubborn,
"And you knew
even
I
when
would,"
you were little.
I replied. She
set the
smiled
folder
faintly
on the
railing between us. "You're going to tell me everything, no lies, no stories, just the truth." She looked out over the water, her voice barely a whisper. The restoration project wasn't about healing. It was about removal. They believed emotions were the source of disobedience, instability, chaos. They wanted to see if they could train a child
or
to
break
live without
She
them.
didn't answer.
My breath
She
hitched.
didn't need to.
"You let them use me," I said, "for money, for control, for whatever sick reason you convinced yourself it was love." Her face twitched, the smallest crack in her calm. "You don't understand what it was like. We had nothing. I was a single mother, drowning. They promised to help, to make you normal." Normal? I laughed, but it came out
They
hollow.
told me it
"Do
was
I look
reversible,
normal to you?"
that when the
Tears
program
filled her
ended,
eyes,
we
though
could
she
be a
didn't
family
let them
again.
fall. But then Richard, he took it too far. He enjoyed it. And when I tried to stop him, they reminded me who paid the bill, who owned our lives. "So you did nothing," I said. "I survived," she cried, her voice breaking. "I thought if I could just keep you alive long enough, maybe I could undo it someday. You could have
She
told
took a
me the
shaky
truth."
breath.
Would
I
you
said,
have
"All
believed
those
me?
years,
You already
watched me
hated
fall
me."
apart and
The
said
silence
nothing.
between us stretched, filled only by the hum of the storm. I opened the folder. Inside were all the names, the other children, the doctors, the signatures. Proof enough to destroy them. "I'm taking this public," I said. "They don't get to hide anymore." She looked at me, fear flashing across her face. "Let
You
them,"
don't
I
understand.
said. "I've
They
been
still
running
have
from
power
them my
if
whole
you
life.
expose them,
I'm done.
they'll come
for
for
the
you."
first time, she looked small. Human. "Then at least tell them I tried." I met her eyes. "Did you?" She didn't answer. The storm outside began to fade. I could see dawn bleeding into the horizon, the light catching on the waves below. The first real morning I'd seen in years. I turned to leave, but she called after me. When I reached the bottom, "What will
The
you
air
do now?"
smelled of rain
I paused
and
at the
iron.
stairs. The world
Whatever
felt new,
I want.
raw, uncertain, mine. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Raines was waiting in his car, engine running. When I handed him the file, he looked at me like he could see what it had cost. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "They built an empire on silence. Someone has to break it." He nodded. But and for the first
3
time,
weeks later,
I felt
the
something
headlines
like
hit.
peace.
Not
Private
happiness.
Medical Foundation
That would take
under
time.
investigation for human experimentation. They didn't print my name. They called me Subject L. I preferred it that way. Some nights, I still dream of the house, of his voice, of her eyes watching from the doorway. But when I wake, I remind myself of something simple, something I finally understand. Survival isn't
The
the
lighthouse
absence
is
of
gone
pain.
now.
It's choosing
Collapsed
to keep
during a
living
storm
in
that
spite
winter.
of it. But sometimes, when I drive along the cliff, I still see that faint pulse of light through the fog. A reminder that even in the darkest places, some part of me refused to die because he was wrong all along. I wasn't special. I was awake.